Chapter 1. I've always been the quieter one, the one who worked in the background, while everyone else stole the spotlight. Growing up in San Francisco, my younger sister Olivia was always the center of attention. She had this magnetic personality, effortlessly drawing people in with her beauty, her charm, and her ability to make everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. Meanwhile, I was the bookish one, the one who stayed up late coding on my laptop or reading tech journals, never really fitting in with the image of what my family expected. But I never imagined it would come to this. I never thought that the two people I trusted most, Olivia and Brian, would plot to take everything from me. They weren't just stealing the spotlight, they were plotting to steal my life, my company, and the future I had built. When they pushed me off that yacht, thinking I'd sink and disappear, they underestimated me. They didn't know how far I'd go to make them pay for what they had done. I can still remember how it felt, sitting at the dinner table, watching my parents beam with pride as Olivia told her stories of modeling gigs, her endless list of admirers, and her success in pageants. They would hang on her every word, nodding and laughing at her jokes, while I sat quietly, just hoping they'd notice the small accomplishments I worked so hard for. When I graduated with a computer science degree, it felt like a win, but it wasn't the kind of win that brought applause. No, that was reserved for Olivia, who could do no wrong. But as I looked back on it all, I realized that was the setup for everything that was to come. I was the responsible one, the one who would work hard to prove myself, and well, she had the world at her feet without even trying. It wasn't that I resented her. Not at first. But as time went on, I started to see a pattern in our lives. Olivia could have anything she wanted. She always had the attention, the admiration, the love, and I was just the smart, reliable one, who would be there when they needed something practical done. That's when I started to question my place in our family, and what it all meant. But things were about to change for me. I built my own company, and it wasn't an overnight success. It was hard work, the kind of work that requires sacrifice and a lot of lonely nights. But when my company, Neurovision, a groundbreaking AI company specializing in emotional intelligence, was finally acquired for $1 billion, that was when I thought maybe my moment had come. Maybe now they'd see me, the woman who built something from nothing, someone worthy of being recognized, respected. I was on top of the world, or at least I thought I was. I was living in a beautiful apartment in downtown San Francisco, the kind of place I had only ever dreamed of, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the bay. My office was a sleek modern space, filled with glass and chrome, reflecting my ambition, my hard-earned success. Yet, there was still something missing. A sense of belonging. A sense that I mattered not just for my achievements, but as a person. I had everything: money, status, the company's success, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was off. And that something was Olivia. She had always been in the background, the shining star of the family. But after my company was acquired, she began to linger more and more. She had moved out to Los Angeles a few years ago, chasing her modeling dreams, but now she seemed to be popping back into my life more often. She was visiting, staying with me for weeks at a time, just until I figure things out, she'd say with that carefree smile. I didn't mind at first. Maybe it was nice to have family around, especially now that things were changing so quickly. But as the months passed, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Little things, small moments that didn't seem like much, but added up over time. Olivia would always talk about how I had it all, how successful I was. But there was something about the way she said it that made me feel uncomfortable. I couldn't put my finger on it. Was she jealous, or was it something else? And then there was Brian. I met him at a venture capitalist conference. He was 40, sharp, well-dressed, with a charm that made me feel like he was paying more attention to me than anyone else in the room. He wasn't like the others. He didn't try to impress me with his success or his contacts. Instead, he was genuinely interested in Neurovision, in my work, and in me. He asked questions about the tech behind our AI system, about my goals for the future. We hit it off immediately, and I felt a connection I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like he understood me in a way no one ever had. Our relationship moved quickly. We were married within 8 months of meeting. The wedding was small, intimate, with just family and a few close friends. Olivia was my maid of honor, her eyes filled with tears as she hugged me tightly. She said I deserved all the happiness in the world, and I believed her. For the first time in years, I felt like I finally had everything: love, success, respect. I thought maybe, just maybe, This was the life I'd been waiting for. But now that I look back, I realize how blind I was. It wasn't just that I had worked hard for everything I achieved. It was that I was always the one who worked hard, while others just took what they wanted. Things started to change with Brian. After the wedding, he was still the attentive husband I had married, but little by little, I noticed things slipping. He became distant, more focused on his business trips, more absorbed in his own world. He was still there, but not really there. And the more I tried to talk to him about it, the more he shut me out. The final straw came one evening when I came home early from an event. Brian and Olivia were sitting together in my living room, looking at something on his laptop. When I walked in, they quickly shut the laptop, their faces flushed. It wasn't anything specific, but I felt this strange energy between them. It wasn't normal, and it wasn't just the casual friendship that I thought they shared. I told myself I was overreacting. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I started noticing the little things, the way Brian would reach out to Olivia, touch her arm lightly when he thought I wasn't looking. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was nothing. But deep down I knew something was wrong. One evening, I decided to confront him. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. I asked him point blank if there was anything going on between him and Olivia. His face went pale, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. But then he laughed it off, saying I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining things. I couldn't keep ignoring it. The unease in my gut was growing. Something was happening, something I wasn't ready to face. And I wasn't about to let it go. Not this time. As I stared at Brian, watching him try to reassure me, I realized I had spent so many years making myself small for the sake of others. But now I was going to find out the truth. I wasn't going to wait around to be played anymore. I had worked too hard, fought too long, to let it all slip away because of the people closest to me. At that moment, everything changed. My world wasn't as solid as I thought it was, and neither was the life I'd worked so hard to build. But I was done being the passive one, the one who sat back and let others control my story. It was time to take control. The truth was coming, and it was going to shake everything I knew about the people I trusted the most, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Chapter 2. The first few weeks after we got married were blissful. At least, that's how I wanted to remember them. Brian was attentive, affectionate, and he made me feel like I was the only one in the world. But it didn't take long for that honeymoon phase to fade. Slowly at first, then all at once. It started with the business trips. At first, it was just one or two. He had meetings, networking events, things I could understand. But then the trips became frequent, almost routine. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, he was a venture capitalist. It made sense that his job required him to travel. But I began to notice how quickly he would pack his things, how little attention he paid to me before leaving. More texts when he was on the road, no more thoughtful calls just to hear my voice. He would disappear for days, and when he came back, it was like I was the last person he wanted to talk to. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that he was just busy, that it was normal. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more it didn't sit right. Something was changing, something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then Olivia came back into the picture. She always knew how to make an entrance, and this time was no different. She called me one evening, her voice laced with the kind of desperation that immediately made me feel guilty for not being there for her sooner. I'm in trouble, she said, her words coming out in a rushed, anxious tone. What happened? I asked, immediately dropping everything. I hated hearing her like this, but part of me wondered if it was just another one of her melodramatic crises. Olivia had always lived in the moment, floating from one catastrophe to the next. My modeling career's at a standstill. I'm broke, and the agency doesn't want me anymore. Can I stay with you for a while? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. Of course, I replied, my heart softening. Despite everything that had been going on, she was still my sister, and I couldn't turn her away. She came over the next day with her things packed, looking as beautiful and put together as ever. Despite the weight of her words, she moved into the guest room, and I welcomed her with open arms, thinking it might be a chance to reconnect. For the first time in years, I felt like the tension between us might finally ease. I tried to convince myself that I was doing the right thing, but even then, a small part of me felt a little uneasy. The days passed, and Olivia's presence was a strange comfort. We spent time catching up, reminiscing about our childhood, and I even enjoyed the company. But it wasn't long before things started to feel off again. I couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia and Brian were spending a little too much time together. A little too much time alone. I caught them in the kitchen one evening, laughing about something. Olivia was standing a little too close to him, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. When they saw me, they quickly straightened up, like they had been caught doing something they shouldn't. I smiled and brushed it off, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. It was almost peaceful, but there was this tension, a presence I couldn't ignore. I heard the soft murmur of voices in the hallway, but when I checked, Brian and Olivia were both in their respective rooms. Still, something about it didn't sit right with me. The next day I decided to confront him. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know. I waited until he came back from his latest trip, hoping for an explanation. When he walked through the door, I was ready. "Brian, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. He raised an eyebrow, a little caught off guard. "What's going on?" "I've been noticing something, and I don't know how to ask this, but are you and Olivia closer than you've been letting on?" I watched him closely, looking for any sign of guilt, any hesitation. He didn't respond immediately, and I could see him trying to process my question. "Olivia and I are just friends, Emma. You know that," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. But something in the way he said it didn't sit right. He was too calm, too controlled. I was looking for a hint of nervousness, a sign that he was lying, but there was nothing. "I'm not blind, Brian," I said, stepping closer. "You two have been spending a lot of time together, and I'm starting to feel like there's something more going on." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You're overthinking this, Emma. She's just staying here for a while. It's no big deal." I didn't buy it. I could feel it in my bones, that something wasn't right, but he didn't offer any further explanation. And after a few more moments of silence, he changed the subject. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. I started watching their interactions more closely. They'd whisper in corners, and every time I walked into the room, they'd stop talking, or the conversation would shift. And Olivia, she was always so good at pretending nothing was wrong. But the way she smiled at Brian, the way she looked at him when she thought I wasn't paying attention, it told me everything I needed to know. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew I had to dig deeper, to find the truth. So, I started keeping track of their movements, their phone calls, their texts, and that's when I found it something I wasn't prepared for. I discovered they were communicating in ways that weren't just friendly. They had been planning something together, something I had never imagined. The way they were acting, the way they spoke to each other when I wasn't around, it wasn't normal. They weren't just siblings and partners. They were scheming. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that my husband and my sister were capable of something so cold. But I had to know for sure. So, I started looking into their finances, their accounts. And that's when I found the evidence that made my blood run cold. I couldn't just sit back anymore. I had to confront them, but I knew I couldn't do it without a plan. This wasn't just about a simple misunderstanding. No, this was bigger, and I was ready to do whatever it took to uncover the truth. As I stood there, holding the evidence in my hands, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to sit idly by and let them destroy everything I had worked so hard for. I would find the truth. And when I did, I would make them pay. But I had to be smart about it. I had to gather everything I could before making my move. Because when the time came, I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to take back what was mine. Chapter 3. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, not anymore. I had already started to suspect Brian and Olivia were more than just friendly, but I needed confirmation. I needed to know for sure. I couldn't live in this fog of doubt, not when everything I had worked for was on the line. It was a Friday afternoon, one of those days when the city felt quiet, as if holding its breath. I left the office early, feeling a strange urge to get home, to check on things. I didn't expect anything. I was just going to go home, grab a cup of coffee, and unwind after a long week. But when I walked through the front door of our sleek downtown apartment, I was greeted by something I wasn't prepared for. Brian and Olivia were sitting at the kitchen table. It wasn't just a casual chat though. They were huddled over Brian's laptop, their heads close together. It was the kind of closeness that should have been reserved for lovers, not siblings. When I stepped in, they jerked back as if they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't have. Brian quickly closed the laptop and straightened up, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a kind of nervous energy. "Emma, hey, you're home early," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We were just looking over some investment opportunities for Olivia. She's been thinking about getting into real estate." Real estate? I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't believe him for a second. The way they were acting, the way they both looked at each other before quickly turning their attention to MIT, wasn't just an innocent conversation. It was something else, something they didn't want me to know. "Investment opportunities," I repeated, keeping my voice steady even though my mind was racing. "And I wasn't invited to this meeting." I couldn't help the bitterness that slipped into my tone. Olivia quickly stood up, brushing off her clothes as if she'd been caught doing something childish. "It's nothing, Emma, really. Just a little brainstorming. Brian's been helping me look at some options for when I get back on my feet." I gave a tight smile, my eyes narrowing. I wasn't convinced, I wasn't sure what was going on, but something wasn't right. There was a coldness in the air, and I could feel it deep in my chest. I forced myself to be calm, to not let on how much I was unraveling inside. "Okay," I said finally, keeping my voice neutral. "Well, I'm going to get some work done. Let me know if you need anything." As I walked to my office, I could hear them whispering again, low enough that I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. I wasn't imagining things. There was something off, something they weren't telling me. I sat at my desk, my laptop in front of me, but my mind was elsewhere. I tried to focus on the numbers I needed to review, but all I could think about was what I had just seen. The way they acted, the way they tried to cover up whatever was going on between them, it felt like a betrayal, even though I couldn't prove it. Not yet, but I would. I wasn't about to let this slide. I had built my company from the ground up, fought for every inch of success. I wasn't going to let my husband and my sister tear it down, not without a fight. That night, after dinner, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew it would be risky, but it was the only way I'd get the answers I needed. I had always been the practical one, the one who relied on facts and logic, but now, I was going to use everything I had, every tool, every resource to uncover the truth. I went to my home security system. It wasn't just for safety anymore. It was my way of protecting what was mine. I had cameras set up all around the apartment, but they weren't hidden. The system was there for general security, but it was time to take it a step further. I had never needed to monitor anyone before, but now I had to. I started installing hidden cameras in places Brian and Olivia frequented: the kitchen, the living room, the office. Anywhere I thought they might talk in private, I made sure I had eyes on them. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. A week went by, and I watched them. Every little interaction, every smile, every laugh, every time they spoke in whispers, I recorded. There were moments when I felt like I was being paranoid, but the evidence started to build up. And with it, my suspicions grew. The final straw came when I stumbled upon something I wasn't ready to see. Late one night, I checked the footage. Olivia had just gotten out of the shower, and she walked into Brian's office. They started talking, their voices low. Olivia's words were too soft to make out, but Brian's voice was clear enough. "We need to move quickly before Emma finds out. We can't afford to wait any longer. Once the deal's done, we'll be in control. We'll have everything." I felt a cold wave wash over me. My heart dropped into my stomach. What was he talking about? What deal? What had they been planning behind my back? I played the footage again, and again, and again. There it was. My worst fear confirmed. They were planning to take everything. They weren't just after money or property. No, this was about my future, my work, everything I had spent years building. They wanted to control it all. I was shaking, but not with fear. No, it wasn't fear anymore. It was anger, raw and fierce. I had worked too hard to let this happen, to let them take what was mine. This wasn't just betrayal, this was theft. They had been planning to destroy me, to take away everything I had ever worked for. The worst part, I didn't even know how long they had been planning this. Was this something that started when we first got married? Or was this a more recent scheme? The idea that Brian and Olivia had been working together behind my back, smiling at me while secretly plotting my downfall, was almost too much to bear. But this was the moment. This was where everything changed. I wasn't going to sit back and let them take everything I had built. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next steps were clear. I needed to take control, to turn the tables. I needed to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. But I couldn't do it just yet. I needed to gather more evidence, more proof that would ensure they couldn't deny what they'd done. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the footage on my screen. There was no turning back now. I had a plan, and I wasn't about to let them win. Chapter 4. I had a plan, and I wasn't about to let them win. The realization of what Brian and Olivia were capable of hit me like a freight train. They weren't just scheming to take my company, my money. They wanted everything I had built. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. No, I was going to fight back, smarter, sharper than they could ever imagine. The first step was to dig deeper. I had to get proof, something concrete that they couldn't deny. I needed to understand how far they had gone in their conspiracy. The truth was right in front of me. But I wasn't about to walk into this blind. I reached out to Lisa Green, a legal consultant I'd worked with in the past. She was meticulous, detail-oriented, and had a no-nonsense approach that I knew I could rely on. I had always trusted her, but now, I needed her skills more than ever. "Lisa," I said when she picked up the phone. "I need your help, it's urgent. I need you to look into Brian's finances, his accounts. I think he's been hiding something." Her voice was steady and calm. "I'll get started right away, Emma. You can trust me to find what you need." It wasn't long before Lisa called me with her findings. "Emma, I've been going over Brian's financial transactions. He's accessed several of your joint accounts, large sums of money, international transfers. There's a pattern here, and it's not just about his investments. He's been researching offshore banking regulations and tax havens. This isn't just financial planning, Emma. This is something much bigger." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had always trusted Brian to manage our money, to handle the complex details of our finances. But this was something else. It wasn't just negligence or poor planning. He was preparing for something I hadn't even seen coming. "I need everything, Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Every transaction, every transfer. Get me the full picture. I need to know who he's working with, who he's been in contact with. I'm not just after money here. This is about something far more dangerous." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Lisa spoke again. "I'm on it, Emma. You'll have everything you need in the morning." I spent the rest of the evening pacing around my apartment, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? How deep was Brian's involvement in this conspiracy? And Olivia? I still couldn't understand how my own sister could be part of this. Was it all about money? Or was there something more? The next day, Lisa called back. "Emma, there's more. Olivia's accounts are connected to the same offshore banks Brian has been using. She has several large debts, and recently, she made substantial transfers to an account in the Bahamas. This is bigger than I thought. They've been planning this for months." My heart sank. My sister, the person I'd always tried to protect, to help, had been lying to me. Not just lying, betraying me. My own flesh and blood had been plotting to destroy everything I'd worked so hard for. And all for what? Money. I spent the rest of the afternoon going over the information Lisa had sent me. The patterns, the connections, everything was clear. Brian and Olivia had been working together. They had been planning this for months. Their goal wasn't just my company. It was my entire life, my future. They wanted it all. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on. Me. I had to confront them. But I couldn't do it without more proof. I needed something that would leave no room for excuses, no way for them to spin the story. I needed hard evidence that would make their lies undeniable. I spent the next few days working on a plan. I installed more cameras, hidden this time, to capture any conversation between Brian and Olivia that could give me more ammunition. I knew that if I was going to bring them down, I had to be thorough. I had to be strategic. Then, one evening, I got a call that changed everything. It was from Lisa again. "Emma, I've been going through some of the accounts more closely. There's something I think you need to hear." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "What is it, Lisa?" "I've been going through the transaction logs, and I found something unusual," she said. "Brian and Olivia, they've been planning your murder." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. My mind raced as I tried to process what Lisa was telling me. "Wait, what do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. How could they? Why would they? I found a recording. Lisa continued, her voice low. It's a conversation between Brian and Olivia. They were talking about how they planned to kill you, make it look like an accident and take everything. Your company, your money, all of it. I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding in my ears. The realization hit me like a wave, but I couldn't let myself drown in it. I couldn't afford to. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was weak, that I wouldn't fight back. But they were wrong. I need that recording, I said, my voice cold now, determined. I need everything? I'm going to make them pay for this. Lisa hesitated. Emma, be careful. This is dangerous. If they know you have this, if they find out, I don't care, I interrupted. They've already crossed the line. I'm not backing down. Later that evening, Lisa sent me the recording. I sat in front of my computer, listening to their voices. It was like a nightmare come to life. The way they spoke about me, about how easy it would be to get rid of me. They had planned everything, the method, the timing, even the way they would lie about it. My body shook with rage, but I didn't cry. I didn't let myself feel sorry for myself. I couldn't afford to. The moment I allowed myself to feel weakness, they would win. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. The next few days were a blur of planning, gathering evidence, and preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. I had the proof I needed now. All I had to do was bring it to light. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not this time. I had everything I needed. Now it was time for them to face the consequences of their betrayal. And I wasn't going to give them an ounce of mercy. Chapter 5. I had no intention of confronting Brian and Olivia right away. I needed time to prepare, to make sure everything was in place. The last thing I wanted was to walk into this blind, to make a mistake. They thought I didn't know, but I was going to turn the tables on them. I was going to be the one in control now. The first step was to protect myself. I wasn't going to let them get away with this without paying the price. I had already moved some of my money into a separate account, something Brian and Olivia couldn't access. It wasn't much, just a few million to start, but it was a start. My lawyer, Lisa, had been helping me set up a more secure financial structure, and I had everything I needed to make sure they couldn't touch what I had left. I also set up a hidden communication system. I couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even my closest friends. I created an emergency email account, one that could automatically send messages to people I trusted if I disappeared. I linked it to a GPS tracker on my phone, so if anything happened to me, there would be a record of where I was. I didn't plan to go down without a fight, and I wasn't about to leave things to chance. The hardest part of all this wasn't the money or the logistics. It was the waiting. Every day felt like a battle between what I knew I had to do and the fear that was gnawing at me. I wasn't just fighting for my assets anymore. I was fighting for my life. The reality of what Brian and Olivia had planned, their willingness to kill me, to destroy everything I had kept playing over and over in my head. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't ignore it. That's when I called Alex Jordan, the private investigator I'd used in the past for a few smaller issues. He was a professional, and I knew I needed someone who could track Brian and Olivia's every move. Someone who could get into places they didn't think anyone could. Alex had the resources and the connections I needed, and most importantly, he didn't ask questions. He was good at what he did, and I was going to use that to my advantage. When he picked up the phone, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Alex, I need your help, I said, my voice steady despite the nerves crawling under my skin. I need you to keep an eye on Brian and Olivia. I think they're planning something, and I need to know everything. Every move they make, every word. They say I'll take care of it, Alex replied without hesitation. You want me to follow them, gather intel, or do you need me to get something specific? I need everything, I told him. I need to know how deep this goes. What are they hiding? Who are they talking to? And most importantly, I need to know if they're still making plans to take me out. I need proof, Alex. I need it all. Consider it done, Alex said, and I could hear the determination in his voice. I'll get started tonight. You'll have a full report by tomorrow morning. That night, I sat in my office, the only light coming from my desk lamp as I stared at the computer screen. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard Brian and Olivia talking about, how easy it would be to get rid of me, how they'd taken steps to ensure my accident would look convincing. They thought I didn't know, but I had all the evidence I needed. I wasn't going to let them think they could just walk away from this. I was going to make sure they paid for everything. I reviewed my notes one last time, double-checking everything. I had seen enough to know that the danger was real, that this wasn't just some passing thought in their minds. They had planned it. They had calculated every move, and they were executing it with precision. I had to act quickly, and I had to be smart. The next morning, I met Alex at a cafe down the street from my apartment. I didn't want to risk having anyone know we were in contact, especially with Brian's watchful eyes always lurking around. He slid into the booth across from me and placed a folder in front of me. "Here's what I've got so far," he said, his voice low. "I've been following Brian and Olivia for the past 24 hours. They've been meeting with some people I don't recognize. They're planning something. And it's bigger than just your finances. They're involved with a few offshore accounts, but I'm still digging into those." I opened the folder, scanning the documents Alex had put together. It was exactly what I needed. He had done his job well. There were names, dates, and even photos of the people Olivia and Brian had been meeting with. These were serious people, businessmen, lawyers, people who could make things disappear if they needed to. They'd been using a series of burner phones, Alex continued. "I've traced them back to a private number, and I'm working on cracking it. But there's more. Olivia's been transferring money, large sums, to an offshore account under a fake name. Brian's been helping her do it. They've been working together on this from the beginning." I felt a chill run through me as I processed the information. This was worse than I had imagined. Olivia wasn't just a bystander. She was fully complicit in this scheme. She was planning to take everything from me, and Brian had been helping her all along. They were already laying the groundwork for the next phase of their plan. "You're doing great, Alex," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to keep following them. Get more information on their contacts, anyone who might be involved. And I need you to get to those accounts. I'm going to need every bit of evidence I can get to make sure they don't get away with this." "I've got it covered," he replied. "I'll be in touch soon with more details. Just don't do anything rash until I get the full picture. Let me handle it." I nodded, my mind already racing with the next steps. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for them to make their move. I wasn't going to let them destroy me without a fight. They thought I was weak, that I wouldn't have the guts to take them down. They were wrong. I stood up and walked out of the cafe, my mind set on one thing. I was going to get my revenge. I was going to take back what was mine. But first, I had to make sure that Brian and Olivia didn't see me coming. Chapter 6. But first, I had to make sure that Brian and Olivia didn't see me coming. The duffel bag packed with everything I needed was already sitting by the door. I was ready for what was ahead, but as I boarded the yacht, a sense of dread washed over me. The Azure Dream was as beautiful and sleek as they came. A 100-foot luxury yacht that could easily make you forget everything that was wrong in your life. The kind of yacht that screamed wealth, power, and indulgence. But today, I wasn't here to relax. I wasn't here to let the ocean breeze calm my nerves or sip champagne on the deck like I had planned. I was here to face the truth and confront the people who had betrayed me. Brian smiled when he saw me. His warm, charming smile that had once made me fall for him, but now it only made my stomach turn. Olivia, as usual, stood by his side, looking effortlessly flawless in a sundress. They were the picture of happiness, the image of a perfect couple, but I knew better. I could see right through them. "Glad you could join us, Emma," Brian said, his voice dripping with a false cheerfulness. "It's going to be great to get away for a while, just the three of us." I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. I could feel the tension building, knotting in my chest, but I wasn't going to show it. Not yet. We set off, the sound of the engines roaring beneath us as we glided across the Pacific. The sun was high in the sky, the water a deep, calming blue. I watched as Brian and Olivia walked ahead to the deck, laughing at something Brian had said. I felt like I was suffocating, stuck in a dream that wasn't mine, a nightmare I hadn't woken up from yet. I spent most of the afternoon pacing the yacht, trying to find a way to stay calm, but with every step I took, I felt more and more like I was walking toward my own execution. The way Brian kept glancing at me, the way Olivia would smile just a little too brightly when she looked my way. It was like they were both waiting for something, waiting for me to slip up, to show weakness. I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when I was so close. By the time dinner rolled around, I had managed to keep my composure, though it was getting harder by the minute. The crew had set the dining table beautifully, with white linens, candles flickering softly in the warm night air, and delicate glasses of wine already poured. But when Olivia suggested something unusual, I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Let's not have the crew serve us tonight," she said, her voice light and casual. "We're on vacation, after all. We can serve ourselves. It'll be fun." At first, I thought it was just her usual spontaneity, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just about being relaxed or carefree. It was about control. If the crew wasn't serving us, it meant we were isolated, just the three of us. A perfect opportunity for whatever plan they were hatching. I smiled, keeping my face neutral. "Sure, that sounds great." I watched as Olivia set the table with a flourish, her movements graceful and practiced. She was always so put together, so effortlessly beautiful. It was infuriating. I'd worked so hard to get where I was, but Olivia, she could float through life, relying on her looks, her charm, and the attention that followed her wherever she went. It wasn't fair, but I couldn't afford to let that get to me. I couldn't afford to let anything slip now. As we sat down, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brian was doing his best to maintain his usual calm demeanor, but I could see through him. I could see the nervousness in his eyes whenever he looked at Olivia, and it made my blood boil. I wasn't going to let them keep lying to me, not when I had the proof, not when I had the evidence that they had been planning my downfall. Dinner was awkward. The conversation forced. Olivia was talking about some new modeling gig she had been offered, but I wasn't really listening. All I could think about was how I had gotten here. How everything had been building up to this moment. And how, in just a few hours, I was going to make them see exactly what they'd done. When dinner was finally over, I excused myself to go below deck. I couldn't stand to be near them any longer. The tension was suffocating, and I needed to think. As I sat in my cabin, I checked the GPS tracker I had hidden in my bag. I had already set it up to send out a distress signal if anything went wrong, but I had no intention of needing it. I was prepared for everything. A few minutes later, I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside my door. I held my breath, waiting. I knew who it was before I even saw them. Brian knocked lightly, then opened the door without waiting for an answer. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, almost too soft. It made my skin crawl. "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, just needed a moment. He hesitated, then stepped into the room. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze searching, but I wasn't about to give him an inch. I wasn't about to let him see how badly I was shaking inside. "I know things have been weird lately," he said, his tone apologetic. "But I swear, everything is fine. It's just been a lot of stress with the deal and everything. But we're okay, Emma." I wanted to laugh, to tell him how much I knew, but instead, I just nodded and gave him a small, tight smile. "I'm sure it's just the pressure," I said, my voice flat. "I'll be fine." He seemed to take that as an invitation to leave, and just like that, he was gone. I stayed in the cabin, staring at the walls, letting the silence wash over me. I couldn't afford to make a move too soon. I had to wait. I had to let them think they were still in control. But as the night wore on, I felt the weight of what was coming. I could feel the moment building, the moment when everything would change. I was ready. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had come too far to let fear hold me back. The yacht sailed steadily into the night, cutting through the dark waters of the Pacific. And somewhere out there, in the quiet stillness of the ocean, I knew my moment was coming. And when it did, I would make sure Brian and Olivia would never forget what they had done. Chapter 7. The moment had finally come. I could feel it in the air, thick with tension, the ocean rushing by beneath us as we sailed further into the night. The yacht rocked gently, its engines humming steadily. Brian and Olivia were too comfortable, too sure of themselves. They didn't realize that the tables had already begun to turn. Dinner was done, and the evening was winding down. The crew had gone to their quarters, leaving the three of us alone on deck. The quiet was unnerving. I could hear the sound of my heartbeat in my ears, but I kept my composure. I smiled and nodded, pretending to be just another guest on the yacht, pretending like nothing was wrong. Brian handed me a cocktail. "I made your favorite," he said with a sly grin. I took it, pretending to appreciate his effort. In reality, I wasn't in the mood for anything he was offering. But I had a role to play, a plan to follow. I needed to keep them in the dark. Just a little longer. The first sip was fine. The taste was familiar, sweet, just the way I liked it. But then, something felt off. I didn't know what it was exactly. Maybe it was just my paranoia. Maybe it was just the weight of everything that had been building up to this moment. I took another sip and then set the glass down on the table. The world around me began to blur. I tried to stay alert, to focus on what was happening, but my body was betraying me. My head grew heavy, my limbs like lead. I forced myself to stand, but I couldn't keep my balance. I swayed, the room spinning around me. Brian's face appeared before me, too close, his smile wide and triumphant. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. Time seemed to stretch, to slow down, but when I opened my eyes, I was no longer on the yacht. I was in the water, struggling to breathe as the cold hit me like a shock. Panic surged through my chest. I was sinking, the weight of the ocean pulling me under. I kicked my legs, fighting against the current, but it felt like I was drowning in the darkness. Then, as if by some miracle, I broke through the surface. The salt water burned my throat, but I gasped for air, each breath a victory. I looked around, disoriented. The yacht already 100 yards away, its lights receding into the distance. They had done it. They had actually tried to kill me. My heart pounded in my chest as I treaded water, struggling to stay afloat. I could barely see anything around me except the endless expanse of the ocean. The yacht was nothing more than a fading silhouette in the distance. They thought I was dead. They would have no idea I was still alive. I fought to stay calm. I couldn't panic. I couldn't waste energy on fear. My training as a swimmer kicked in, the instinct to survive overtaking everything else. I forced myself to take slow, steady strokes, keeping my head above water. The cold was unbearable, but I knew I had to keep going, to find something, anything to hold on to. It was hours before I saw anything. A small fishing boat appeared on the horizon, its engine humming softly. I didn't know if they would see me, if they would even be close enough to help, but I didn't have a choice. I waved my arms, screaming out into the night, though my voice felt like it might crack from the salt and exhaustion. The boat didn't stop. It kept moving, oblivious to my desperate cries. I felt my hope begin to slip away. Then I remembered the GPS device I had hidden in my bag before leaving the yacht. I reached for it, pressing the button that would send out an emergency signal. Minutes later, the boat turned toward me. The lights on its deck flickered as it made its way closer. I could barely hold on, but the boat was coming. They saw me. As they pulled up beside me, I heard one of the men shout, "Dios mío! What's a woman doing out here, eh?" I couldn't speak, too tired to form words, but I managed to croak out, "Please help me." They pulled me aboard, wrapping me in a blanket as I collapsed, my body shaking uncontrollably. "How did you get here?" the older man asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. I barely had the energy to answer. The yacht. They pushed me off. The younger man, his face still skeptical, looked at me for a moment, then said, "No boat has passed here in 2 days, what happened?" But I couldn't explain it then. I was too far gone, too weak to form coherent thoughts. The older man, his name was Luis Rivera, took charge. "Marco, get her water. Slowly, we need to keep her awake." They took care of me as best as they could, but I was too far from shore. The cold had drained me, and I could barely keep my eyes open. But they didn't stop. They kept me warm, kept me hydrated, and made sure I didn't slip away. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a small spark of hope. The next several hours were a blur. I drifted in and out of consciousness, too exhausted to fight. But I wasn't going to let this be the end. Not yet, not when I had so much left to do. When I finally came to, the boat was still in motion, heading toward the coast. Marco had kept an eye on me, making sure I was comfortable. "We'll get you to land soon," he said, his voice kind but firm. I nodded, my body too tired to do anything else. As we made our way toward a small coastal village, I knew I couldn't stay there for long. I couldn't afford to be found by anyone who knew Brian and Olivia. They thought I was dead, and that was how it needed to stay for now. They had tried to kill me, but I wasn't going to let them win. I needed time. Time to gather my strength. Time to plan. And when I was ready, I would return to San Francisco, to my life, and I would make sure Brian and Olivia would pay for what they had done. The storm was far from over. Chapter 8. The storm was far from over. It had just begun. And I was determined to make sure Brian and Olivia would never forget what they had done. I couldn't go back to my old life just yet. I couldn't let them believe they had won, that they could get away with everything they'd planned. They thought they were smart, that they could outwit me and take everything without any consequences, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I had been pushed to my breaking point, but I was done being a victim. I was done hiding in the shadows. The first thing I did when I returned to San Francisco was change the locks. I had my home completely resecured, every entrance reinforced. My place had always felt like a sanctuary, but now it felt like a fortress, one that I was going to defend at all costs. I moved quickly, not wasting a second. The clock was ticking, and I needed to act fast. The evidence I had collected from the cameras and the records I had from Lisa was enough to build my case. I had everything I needed: proof that Brian and Olivia had been working together, proof that they had been plotting my murder, and the records that linked them to offshore accounts and illegal activities. But I wasn't going to just hand it over to the police. I needed them to feel the full weight of their actions, to suffer the consequences of what they had done to me. I started by reaching out to my lawyer, Maggie Harris. She had been with me through some tough negotiations in the past, but this was different. This wasn't just about business deals anymore. This was personal. "Maggie, I need you to help me set up a plan," I said when we met. "I want everything. I want to make sure Brian and Olivia can never run from what they've done." She nodded, her expression serious. "I'm with you, Emma. But we need to be careful. If we go public with this too soon, they might have the upper hand. Let's gather everything quietly, set the trap, and then we strike." I agreed. I wasn't in any rush to expose everything just yet. But I wasn't going to wait for the perfect moment either. I was going to create my own moment. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I had to move fast, and I couldn't afford to make mistakes. I had a new security system installed in my house, one that went far beyond the cameras I had already set up. The new system would track Brian and Olivia's every move. It would be impossible for them to slip past me unnoticed. Every room, every hallway, every corner of the house would be under surveillance. They had taken enough from me. Now it was time for me to take back control. As I sat in front of my computer, reviewing the data I had gathered, I could feel the old fire in me reigniting. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, it was all still there, but now it was channeled into something far more powerful. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had worked so hard for. I spent hours putting everything together. The documents, the footage, the conversations I had recorded. All of it was about to become the gift I was preparing for them. I had already set up a meeting with Alex Jordan, the private investigator who had helped me track their movements. He was going to deliver the evidence I needed at just the right time. But before I could make the final move, I had to deal with them directly. I had to face them one last time. I wasn't going to hide anymore, and I wasn't going to let them get away with pretending they hadn't been plotting behind my back. It was a few days after the yacht incident, and I decided it was time to call them both out. I'd had enough of the lies, enough of the games. They thought they could kill me and walk away untouched. But they were wrong. I'd be the one to walk away from this, and they'd be the ones to pay. I called Brian's phone first, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, his voice warm and familiar, as if nothing had changed. "Emma, hey, how's it going? I've been thinking about you, about everything that happened." "Don't." I interrupted him, my voice cold. "I know what you've been doing. I know everything. And I'm done pretending I don't." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He was trying to figure out how to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. "You and Olivia," I continued. "You thought you could just get away with this, didn't you? You thought I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't catch on. But I did. I know about the offshore accounts, the transfers, the plans, and I'm coming for you." I could hear him shift in his seat, his breath quickening. He wasn't expecting me to be this bold, this direct. He had no idea that I had already gathered everything I needed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, his voice strained. "You're not thinking clearly. Let's talk about this when we get back to the city." "Don't bother coming back," I snapped. "I'm done. I have everything I need. You and Olivia won't be getting away with this." Before he could say another word, I hung up the phone. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was like nothing I had ever felt before. I knew it had to be done, and I wasn't going to waste any more time. The trap was set, and I was ready to make my move. I turned to the new surveillance system that had been installed in my home. The footage was coming in now, a steady stream of activity from all corners of the house. I had made sure to install cameras in the areas where Brian and Olivia spent the most time. Every word they said, every action they took, was recorded and ready to be used against them. As the hours passed, I couldn't help but think about everything that had led me here, the long nights, the hard work, the years of being overlooked and undervalued. But I wasn't going to let their betrayal be the end of me. This was just the beginning. I wasn't going to sit back and wait any longer. Brian and Olivia had no idea what was coming, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly how far I was willing to go to make them pay for everything they'd taken from me. Chapter 9. I was willing to go to make them pay for everything they'd taken from me. I wasn't going to let Brian and Olivia think they could walk away from this, not after everything they had done. I had waited long enough. It was time to confront them, to show them that I was no longer the woman they could manipulate. The dinner was set. A small, intimate affair for just the three of us. I had arranged everything carefully. The table was beautifully set with white china and gleaming glassware. There were 3 chairs, one for me, one for Brian, and one for Olivia. And at the center of it all, the gift I had prepared for them, everything they needed to see to understand just how deep their betrayal ran. I made sure everything was perfect. The lighting, the food, the atmosphere. I wasn't going to give them any reason to believe this wasn't just another dinner. I needed them comfortable, relaxed, so they would let their guard down. I had to see it all, to know that when I finally struck, it would be with precision. When the doorbell rang, I felt my heart race. I'd planned for this moment for days, and now, they were walking into the very trap I'd set. I opened the door to find Brian standing there with his usual half smile, his arm around Olivia. She was dressed in one of her signature sundresses, her makeup flawless as always, her charm radiating like it always did. "Evening, Emma," Brian said, his voice smooth, the way he always used to speak to me. But tonight, it felt empty, like a rehearsed line. Olivia didn't say much, just gave me a nod, her eyes avoiding mine. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let them in. They moved to the dining room, where I had already placed the gift, everything I had uncovered. "Everything looks beautiful," Olivia said, her voice still warm, though I could sense the tension now hanging between us. I smiled politely, though it felt like a mask. "I'm glad you think so," I said, keeping my voice even. I watched as Brian took a seat, casually scanning the room. Olivia joined him, settling into her seat. The two of them completely unaware of what was about to happen. Once they were seated, I slowly took my own chair. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but I kept my hands steady. There was no room for mistakes. "So, how's everything going?" Brian asked, trying to make small talk. I wasn't interested in small talk. I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine. The truth had to come out. And it was time to confront them. "I think you both know exactly why I asked you to come here tonight," I said, my voice cold, cutting through the silence. Brian's eyes flickered for a moment, a flash of discomfort before he composed himself. Olivia, on the other hand, looked at me blankly, as if she wasn't sure where this was headed. "I don't know what you mean, Emma," Brian said, his tone guarded, but I wasn't fooled. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to play the role of the confused husband, the man who had no idea what his wife was talking about. "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice steady but filled with determination. "I think you both know exactly what I mean. You thought you could pull this off and get away with it, but you didn't count on me." Brian's face hardened, the charming mask slipping for a moment. Olivia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting toward Brian, a silent plea in them, but I didn't care anymore. They had crossed the line. "I have everything," I continued. "The accounts, the transfers, the conversations, the recordings. I have it all. I know everything about your plan. The offshore accounts, the money you've been hiding, the lies you've been feeding me. And I know about the plan to kill me, to get rid of me, so you can have it all." There was a long silence. Brian opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I didn't let him off the hook. "I've seen the evidence, Brian," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I know about your little meetings with Olivia, how you both planned everything. You thought you could kill me and take everything I worked for, but you were wrong." Olivia's face went pale. For a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, something fleeting, but it quickly disappeared behind her usual cold, controlled mask. Brian, on the other hand, was frozen, his eyes widening as the reality of what I was saying hit him. You don't know what you're talking about. Emma, Brian said, his voice now low, almost desperate. This is all just a misunderstanding. You're reading too much into things. I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. It was bitter, sharp, a misunderstanding. Is that what you think this is? I heard everything, Brian. I know everything. I reached into my purse and pulled out the recording device I had been using, the one I had hidden on the yacht. I placed it on the table between us. This is the misunderstanding you were talking about. I clicked play. The sound of their voices filled the room. The conversation I had captured just days before, their plotting and scheming laid bare. I watched as their faces drained of color. As they heard the same words I had heard, their plans to kill me, to take everything. There was no denying it now. There was no way for them to lie their way out of this. I don't think there's any misunderstanding anymore, I said, my voice low and steady. Brian's face twisted with anger, his mask slipping completely now. You don't know what you're doing, Emma, he spat. You think you can just bring us down with this? This is nothing. But Olivia stood up suddenly, her hands trembling. This is insane, Emma. You don't know what you're talking about, she cried, her voice breaking. But it wasn't enough. The truth was already out. No, Olivia, I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said coldly. And I'm not going to let you to get away with this. I reached for my phone, hitting the number I had already pre-programmed. I didn't hesitate. The police were on their way, and I made sure the FBI was already in the loop. Don't think you're getting away with this, I said, as the tension in the room grew thick. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Brian and Olivia looked at each other, realizing that the game was over. But it wasn't enough. They still had to answer for everything they had done, and I wasn't about to let them walk away. Chapter 10. They still had to answer for everything they had done. And I wasn't about to let them walk away. The trial came quickly. The evidence was damning, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction watching Brian and Olivia being led into the courtroom. They were no longer the people who had controlled everything, the people who had destroyed my trust. Now, they were the ones who would have to answer for their actions. It was surreal. Sitting there, in the courtroom, surrounded by lawyers, witnesses, and the quiet murmur of the room. The weight of what had happened was heavy in my chest, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was still in shock. The reality of everything that had transpired was only now sinking in. I had been betrayed by the two people I trusted most in the world, Brian, my husband, and Olivia, my sister, the ones I thought I could count on, had been plotting behind my back, trying to destroy me for nothing more than greed and power. The trial lasted for weeks, and every day I watched as they tried to manipulate the facts, tried to spin their lies into something believable. Brian, ever the smooth talker, played the part of the concerned husband, but the evidence didn't lie. The recordings, the financial records, the testimonies, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. They had been working together, planning my death, planning to steal everything I had worked for. There were moments during the trial when I thought I might break. When I saw Brian sitting there, his face twisted in anger, trying to maintain his composure, I wanted to scream. When Olivia took the stand, her eyes full of false tears, I wanted to run out of the room. But I couldn't. I had to see this through. I had to make them pay for what they had done. And then, it was over. The verdict came down. Brian was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Olivia received 15 years, though I knew that her sentence was lighter because of her eventual cooperation with the authorities. But it didn't matter. They were both going to prison, and they would never be able to hurt me again. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but it was quickly replaced by something else: emptiness. The justice I had fought for was finally here, but it felt hollow. I had won, yes, but at what cost? I had lost so much in this process, not just my trust in Brian and Olivia, but a part of myself. I had spent years building a life with them, believing in the people they were, only to realize that they were never who I thought they were. I had been betrayed in the worst way possible, and no amount of justice could give me back the time I had lost. I tried to push the emptiness aside as I walked through the courthouse, but it lingered, a quiet presence in the back of my mind. I knew that I needed to rebuild, to move on, but I wasn't sure where to start. Everything had changed, and it felt like the ground beneath me was still shaking. Over the next few weeks, I focused on what I could control. I threw myself into my work, into rebuilding the parts of my life that I could salvage. I started volunteering with a few organizations, trying to make a difference in a way that felt meaningful, but I knew that wasn't enough. I needed to do more. I needed to help others who had been through what I had gone through, others who had been betrayed, manipulated, or victimized by the people they trusted most. That's when I decided to start Phoenix Trust. It would be a foundation dedicated to helping people who had been through financial abuse, betrayal, and fraud. I wanted to create a space where people could find the support they needed to rebuild their lives, just as I was doing. I wanted to make sure that no one else had to go through what I did without help. The first day I opened the doors to Phoenix Trust, I felt a sense of purpose return to me. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the future. It was about helping others, about turning my pain into something meaningful. The foundation became my focus, my way of taking back control over my life and my future. I spent the next several months working tirelessly, building the foundation, connecting with people who had gone through similar experiences. Slowly but surely, Phoenix Trust started to grow. We provided legal support, financial assistance, therapy services, and a network of people who understood what it meant to be betrayed. As I stood at the first charity event for Phoenix Trust, I looked out at the crowd of people who had come to support the cause. There were survivors, advocates, and people who just wanted to make a difference. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. I was doing something that mattered, something that would leave a legacy far beyond what Brian and Olivia had ever taken from me. But even as I stood there, listening to the speeches and the applause, I knew the journey wasn't over. It would never be fully over. I still had scars, still had moments when I felt the weight of the betrayal creeping in, but I was learning to live with them, learning to turn the pain into something that could help others. I walked off the stage, my heart heavy but filled with purpose, and I couldn't help but think that this was what I was meant to do. This was my redemption. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been betrayed. For everyone who had lost trust in the people they loved. Phoenix Trust was my way of rising from the ashes, of finding strength in the darkest moments of my life. And as I looked around at the people gathered here, I realized that I wasn't alone. I was part of something bigger than myself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly free. If you're reading this and you've been through something similar, if you're still finding your way after betrayal, remember this: you are stronger than you think. You will rebuild, piece by piece, and when you do, you will rise. Don't let the darkness consume you, because the light is always ahead, even when it feels like you're lost. And if you're still in the dark, know this: there is always hope. There is always a way forward. And there is always a way to take back what was stolen from you. Thank you for witnessing my journey. You are stronger than you know.